There are moments in a woman's life when the world feels too loud, too invasive, too insistent on her becoming something she is not. It comes not as a storm, but as a subtle tremor, a quiet stirring deep within her chest where the air vibrates differently than before. It is not anger nor despair, nor a sudden illumination like lightning across a dark sky. It is the gentle recalibration of a life long misaligned, a whisper from the cells themselves that something must change. In that small but unstoppable moment, she begins to feel the edges of her own energy, sensing without argument or explanation where she ends and the world begins. She begins to remember herself, and the remembering is both exhilarating and terrifying, like walking barefoot across sharp stones that sting, but leave her alive in ways she never imagined. For years, perhaps decades, she played roles assigned before she even understood the shape of her own face. The flawless daughter, the endlessly patient partner, the devoted mother, the tireless friend, each a costume stitched together from the desires, fears, and expectations of everyone else. She wore them so convincingly that even she began to believe they were hers. And yet in the quiet spaces of her life, in the unlit corners where no one watched, a tiny voice persistent as a single candle in a vast cathedral. This is not you. That voice was easy to ignore when life demanded performance. But there comes a day when the body refuses the pretense, when the heart can no longer hide behind the illusion of compliance. The soul murmurs gently at first, then with increasing urgency, stop, look, know yourself. This awakening does not arrive like an announcement. It creeps into her being with the patience of a tide, reshaping her from within. Slowly, she begins to distinguish the melody of her own spirit from the cacophony imposed upon her. She notices that her yes is automatic, reflexive, conditioned by the pressure of expectation. Her anger, once overwhelming, was a signal she had ignored for too long. Her exhaustion was a mirror reflecting how deeply she had surrendered herself to roles that never belonged to her. In this reclamation, she realizes that true boundaries are not rules to enforce, but an alignment with her own frequency. She is no longer negotiating with the world, she is the boundary itself. This is not a rebellion born of defiance, but a quiet sovereignty, a refusal to allow her essence to be leased out, borrowed, or stolen. There is an unshakable clarity that comes with this first recognition, a clarity that refuses compromise. She begins to see with piercing certainty where her being ends and the demands of others begin. And in seeing it, she experiences the paradox of liberation the world will not always understand. Her awakening may provoke confusion, resistance, even anger in those accustomed to her compliance. Families, friends, lovers, all may falter when the familiar scripts are no longer performed. Dysfunctional systems, after all, are built on fragile equilibrium, requiring every member to act in a prescribed role. And she has stepped off the stage. She does not explain her absence. She does not justify her presence. She simply inhabits herself. In the quiet of this newfound sovereignty, a sacred sort of solitude emerges. It is neither lonely nor punitive. It is the sanctuary where her essence begins to breathe freely. Here, the soul can expand, stretch, and recognize itself in the reflection of its own depth. She learns to sit with the subtle tensions of life without losing herself in them, to honor her own rhythm even when the world demands a different tempo. And in this space, she discovers the first truth of her awakening: her life will never again be up for negotiation. Not because she is harsh, not because she wishes harm, but because she has finally arrived at herself, and there is no going back. As she walks further into this inner landscape, she begins to notice the subtle ways in which love and obligation have been disguised as chains. For years, she believed that carrying the burdens of others was a mark of devotion, a sign of strength, a measure of her worth. She thought that to feel another's pain, to absorb their anxieties, was the truest expression of empathy. But awakening teaches her otherwise. She discovers the insidious trap of participation mystique, where the boundaries between self and other dissolve until she's no longer a person, but a mirror, reflecting the unprocessed shadows of everyone around her. Every borrowed fear, every imposed guilt, every uninvited expectation had once become her own. She realizes with a mixture of grief and relief that this was never empathy, it was energetic entanglement. In this recognition, she learns the delicate art of discernment, of holding space without being consumed by it. She can now sit beside a friend's grief without letting it define her. She can respond to a partner's frustration without internalizing blame. She can witness her children's struggles without dissolving into panic or self-reproach. The door to her inner life is no longer open to every knock, and she has become the conscious gatekeeper of her own soul. This choice is radical revolutionary in its quietness, and it does not require applause. Those who had relied on her constant availability may brand her absence as betrayal, may call her cold, may accuse her of selfishness. And she accepts this because she knows the truth. Self-preservation is not cruelty, and refusing to be the vessel for everyone else's unresolved pain is not a failure. It is a reclamation. Step by step, she rebuilds herself from the fragments of a life that was never fully hers. She refuses to put her decisions up for debate, no longer apologizing for choices that honor her own integrity. Each yes and no becomes a declaration simple and uncompromised. This is my choice, full stop. The need to justify herself diminishes as a subtle freedom takes root in her chest. She recognizes that when others demand explanations, they are rarely seeking understanding. They are seeking control. And she is no longer available for that. To act otherwise would be to trade fragments of her soul for temporary approval, and she now understands the cost is far too high. Simultaneously, she begins to perceive the soft, almost invisible forms of disrespect that had long slipped past her awareness. A joke with an edge, a simpering compliment, a sly remark, all once tolerated as harmless or lighthearted, now register with clarity. She recognizes the corrosive erosion these microaggressions create, the slow dismantling of self-worth that masquerades as casual conversation. And she begins to respond differently, not with aggression, but with withdrawal. She steps away from spaces and relationships that fail to honor her dignity, choosing absence over participation in the subtle violence of devaluation. And in that withdrawal, she discovers something extraordinary. The world does not end. In fact, it realigns. The energy she once expended in defense and explanation, in compromise, now nourishes her, and a quiet abundance begins to fill the spaces left behind. She learns, too, to disentangle herself from projections. The anger, guilt, shame, and disappointment of others are no longer her responsibility. She watches as those unintegrated shadows once dumped onto her like heavy stones are returned to their rightful owners. In refusing to carry what was never hers, she fosters a profound kind of psychic hygiene. It is not heartlessness, not vengeance, not judgment. It is a recognition of a simple truth. True healing can only occur when each person bears their own darkness. By stepping away from being the emotional landfill of others, she clears the space in which her soul can finally breathe, expand, and thrive. In the quiet aftermath of this shedding, she confronts the illusion of sacrifice that once bound her. The stories she was told that love requires self-abandonment, that devotion is measured by the pieces of herself she gives away, are revealed for what they were, lies layered over the tender truth of her being. She realizes that a relationship demanding her fragmentation is not love. It is a cage. To survive within such bonds would mean trading authenticity for approval, surrendering the sacred core of herself for a mirage of harmony. And she refuses. She begins to understand that the courage to walk away is not abandonment, but preservation. The integrity of her soul takes precedence over the fleeting comfort of connection. When she steps away, leaving behind attachments others deem sacred, she does not do so lightly, and she does not do so without grief. Yet, in the space that opens, there is liberation. She walks in silence, but the quiet is rich with the presence of herself, the resonance of a spirit no longer borrowed, no longer compromised. Her path is not without pain. Relationships that relied on her compliance falter. Bonds that once seemed unbreakable fracture in the absence of her constant appeasement. She is judged, called selfish, accused of coldness, and still she stands. Because she has recognized a truth that is non-negotiable. Freedom within herself is not optional, and the compromise of her essence is too steep a price for anyone else's comfort. The world may resist, may rage, may plead, but the awakened woman has learned that the only loyalty worth preserving is to her own inner life. From this clarity springs a quiet authority, an energy that does not shout, but communicates with unshakable resonance. People feel it immediately. Those who cannot respect her boundaries simply find no access to her, not because she has built walls, but because she has become a sanctuary unto herself. With this sovereignty comes a new rhythm, one that the world is ill-prepared to comprehend. She learns to inhabit the space between request and response, between expectation and action, and discovers that therein lies her power. She no longer reacts automatically, no longer folds herself into the shape demanded by circumstance or convenience. She pauses. She listens. She measures not by the world's timetable, but by her own inner compass. And in this deliberate stillness, she experiences the subtle miracle of autonomy, the ability to be fully herself, unfragmented, undiluted, unborrowed. As the layers fall away, as the roles dissolve, a profound calm settles into her bones. The rage that once flared, that insistent fire warning of violated boundaries, is no longer needed. The storms of the past gave her warning, and she has heeded them. Now, in her calm, there is magnetism. Her energy draws to her what belongs, what resonates with her frequency, and repels what does not. It is not selective in judgment, but in alignment. Her soul has become its own compass, and the universe, it seems, respects that navigation. And in this newfound presence, she begins to understand the depth of what awakening truly offers. She realizes that solitude is not punishment, it is sanctuary. Silence is not emptiness, it is space to breathe and expand. In the stillness, she discovers the rhythms of her own spirit, the truths that were always hers but were drowned out by noise and expectation. It is here, in the sacred quiet of her inner life, that she comes to know a reality far richer than any she had ever inhabited while playing roles designed by others. In this sanctuary of self, she begins to see how the quality of her relationships transforms. It is no longer quantity that matters, nor the ceaseless approval of others. Depth becomes her currency, authenticity, her measure. She notices with gentle astonishment that when she stops bending, she attracts souls who do not seek to bend her. When she stops carrying projections, she encounters people unburdened by the need to use her as a screen. When she refuses to betray herself for comfort, she discovers connections where truth is not a threat, but the foundation. She learns quietly that the energy she brings into a relationship is the soil in which its growth will either flourish or wither. And she tends this soil carefully, not with calculation, but with reverence. Yet this journey is not a linear path of ease. Every step into authenticity awakens resistance from the world she once inhabited. Family dynamics shift, old friends withdraw, colleagues and partners are unsettled by her presence. She feels the pang of isolation, a hollow echo of the bonds she once assumed eternal. And in these moments, she sits with her grief, allowing it to flow through her without consuming her, without diluting her essence. She recognizes the paradox, the loss of what was never hers to keep brings the freedom to claim what truly is. She grieves not for her own loss, but for the illusions she once held, the roles she once performed, the compromises she once believed were necessary. And through this grief, she discovers her resilience. The awakened woman learns to honor her own rhythm in every facet of life. She understands that no one else's timetable dictates her worth, no one else's judgment defines her. The compulsion to explain herself, to negotiate, to placate, falls away like leaves in the wind. She makes choices that feel like oxygen to her spirit, that nourish her in ways she once feared were selfish. She refuses to sacrifice herself for relational harmony, social approval, or the fragile peace of compliance. Every choice, every refusal, every step back is a quiet assertion of her sovereignty. She is no longer the supporting actress in someone else's story. She is the author, the keeper of the plot, the guardian of the soul, whose chapters she alone may write. And it is here in the culmination of these transformations that a subtle, almost imperceptible vibrational shift occurs. The world around her begins to resonate differently, not because she demands it, but because she has aligned herself with her own frequency. People who required her compliance fade, environments that thrived on her surrender dissolve, and relationships built on misalignment no longer hold sway. And in the spaces that open, there is room for the real to arrive, connections, opportunities, and experiences that honor her presence rather than deplete it. The universe, it seems, conspires to honor her truth when she has the courage to live it fully. She begins to understand that this journey is not one of isolation, but of alignment. The boundaries she builds are not walls, but outlines of sacred space. They are not rejection, but invitation, an invitation to the world to meet her where she stands fully herself. And in this realization, she discovers a profound peace, one that does not demand applause, one that does not seek validation. It is the quiet, unwavering certainty that she is enough, whole, and worthy simply by existing as herself. And in that peace, she comes to the deepest truth of all, that the cost of awakening is never too high, for the return is the only thing that truly matters, herself. The boundaries she has anchored, the roles she has shed, the projections she no longer carries, all converge into a life that vibrates with authenticity. She has walked through the fire of expectation, the quiet betrayal of silence, the slow erosion of self, and emerged not hardened, but luminous, not withdrawn, but fully present. The world may still test her, still offer temptation to compromise, still whisper in familiar tones, urging her to shrink. Yet, she has learned the rhythm of her own spirit too well to comply. She moves through these challenges with a gentle authority, a sovereignty that requires no explanation, no defense, no justification. In the reflection of her own eyes, she sees not a woman exhausted by roles imposed upon her, but a woman awake, fierce in her gentleness, vast in her capacity for presence, unbroken in her clarity. There is a magnetism now not born of charm or strategy, but of alignment, the resonance of a soul that has remembered itself. She has learned that love is not surrender, that connection is not compromise, and that the deepest intimacy comes not from molding herself to others, but from meeting them fully from a place of wholeness. The people she encounters mirror this truth drawn into her orbit, because they too are seeking resonance, not control, depth, not performance. The old social circles, the habitual patterns, the relentless expectations, they dissolve, naturally leaving space for what is authentic, real, and nourishing. And sometimes in the quiet hours, she reflects on the journey that brought her here, the fear, the grief, the rage, the exhaustion, the small and large betrayals she endured, both from others and from herself. She feels gratitude for each, for every rupture was a teacher, every conflict a doorway, every painful separation a guide toward alignment. The cost of awakening was steep, yes, but she would not trade it. For what she has gained is not fleeting, it is eternal, her soul back in its own shape, unborrowed, uncompromised, sovereign. She understands now that to betray herself for comfort, for peace, or for acceptance is to contract the life force itself, and she will never again allow that. The awakened woman moves through her days with an awareness that is quiet yet profound. Her solitude is rich, her connections deep, her presence luminous. She no longer fears silence because it is filled with herself. She no longer fears conflict because truth is her allegiance. She no longer fears loss because what leaves was never truly hers and what remains is sacred. She has become a living testament to the power of self-possession, the profound beauty of inner alignment, in the quiet revolution that occurs when a soul chooses itself above all else. And as she stands in this place of profound inner sovereignty, she knows that the journey is ongoing. Each day is a practice, each encounter an opportunity to refine the boundaries she now holds with grace and clarity. And yet, even in this continual practice, there is no fear, only reverence for the sacred space she now occupies. There is no shame, only recognition of the immense gift of having arrived at herself. If you feel stirred by this journey, if some part of you recognizes the awakening within, consider sharing your reflections. Comment on the boundaries you are learning to honor, the pieces of yourself you are reclaiming, or the quiet victories that have made your soul sing. Share this with those who may need permission to choose themselves. Like, share, subscribe, and join in this quiet revolution of presence and authenticity.